DC Comics publishing numbers will be cut 20 to 25%. That's to imply that the number of titles they're going to be cutting back on after this big layoff is going to be 20 to 25% of the titles. Well, I'll tell you what, from everything I read, that's not quite true. I predict at least 50%. I'll tell you where I'm getting my numbers from based on what Jim Lee said in this article today. Before I do, huge help to me. Subscribe to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. That's going to help me a lot. I appreciate it. Also, you can support my work at collegeofthedead.com. Also, sign up at epicmermaids.com so we can notify you when The Mermaids is released. Back to the article. This comes from Bleeding Cool. And again, this is sourced off an interview that Jim Lee did earlier today with Hollywood Reporter. Specifically, supposedly the staff layoffs were only 20% of staff. However, they gutted major departments. They let loose everyone's executive assistants, basically, and a lot of the senior management. And it's not funny. It's just like, it's a big number. It's at least 30%. Then with respect to them publishing comic books, so Jim Lee had to start out saying, we are still in the business of publishing comics. It's like, okay. So they're cutting back dramatically. Now, he says this here specifically, Jim Lee says, that said, we will be reducing the size of the slate, but it's about looking at everything and looking at the bottom 20 to 25% of the line that wasn't even breaking even or wasn't losing money. It's about more punch for the pound, so to speak, and increasing the margins of the books that we're doing. It was about aligning the books to the franchise brand content we've developed and making sure that every book we put out for a reason. A lot of funny things in this statement. Some of it sounds like things that were said to Jim Lee to persuade him. Some of it sounds like things that they told Jim Lee he could repeat it this way and it wouldn't sound as bad. But look, first of all, let's talk about what it means to break even. Now, I have published a lot of comic books, and I've looked at breaking even because that's what you have to worry about when you're publishing. You at least have to get your money back. If you don't break even, you lose money. If you lose money, it's not good, and it can't go on a regular basis. You're almost out of business when you start losing money, so you got to really pay attention to that. Now, DC Comics has been a division of Warner Brothers, Warner Media for the longest time. So they haven't had to really produce profit and loss on a per comic basis and really worry about it. Obviously, they sourced incredible licensing, incredible movies, video games, all sorts of cool stuff out of the intellectual property. So for a long time, it was like, well, look, let the comics do what the comics do. It's so mysterious. You got to let this is the goose that lays the golden eggs. Don't mess with the comics. Okay, that's all fine, but not anymore. Not since new management has started paying attention to DC Comics. Bottom line matters. When Jim Lee says here we're looking at the bottom 20 to 25% of the line that wasn't breaking even or was losing money. Now, not breaking even and losing money is the same thing. So this means there was a lot of pointed discussion about this. It was really, really told him, hey, listen, you need to start looking at the publisher. You need to start looking at what is making money and what's losing money. You need to start focus on increasing the margins of the books that we're doing. This is the CEO, probably Jason Killar, talking to Jim Lee, saying, hey, if you're going to stay on as publisher, you have to take responsibility for profit margin. Now, first of all, let's look at this statement about not breaking even and losing money. So let's just say that the titles weren't breaking even. So 20 to 25% of the line wasn't breaking even. Well, what do you mean breaking even? There are two ways of breaking even. One, gross profit. Two, net profit. All right? What do you mean gross profit? What I mean gross profit is the direct art and editorial costs. So the cost that it takes to go from a blank page to a comic book that is printed and shipped and delivered. That's like gross profit. You take the total revenue generated by the title and multiple platforms. Let's say you're going to sell it digitally, you get a couple of bucks out of that. You're going to sell it in a trade paperback, you get a couple of bucks out of that. some reprint revenues, whatever it is. Revenues, less direct expenses to deliver that item. That's your gross profit. Okay, so let's say, now believe it or not, they spend a lot of money to make these comics. So just to do rough numbers, they spend, let's say, $40,000. Let's even cut it down a little bit, save them some money. We'll make it $30,000 to produce the art and editorial for a comic. Let's just attribute some printing to it, just easy numbers. Printing and shipping, $10,000. So they have $40,000 in. Let's say they sell 25,000 copies, the price point's this, that, whatever. They get back $40,000 in revenue. Okay, so $40,000 went out, $40,000 came back in. That's 100% break even. No money is lost. That's a gross profit, break even on gross profit. Well, what about net profit? What's net profit? Net profit's when you calculate in the overhead. Overhead is what? All of the editors, the publisher's salary, the design supervisors, accounting, bookkeeping, marketing, sales, rent for office space, health insurance, salary and benefits for anybody related to the company. You have to do that. You have to look at an attributable cost for those sorts of things. Now, you can say there could be fixed overhead to some degree. You know, you've got a team, and the team is, let's say, 100 people. Frankly, I don't know how many they started with. They laid off a bunch of people. So they might have started with as many as 100 people in the DC Comics office, maybe more. I've never been to their New York or their California office. I don't know. Just picking a number of 100. So if you're putting out, let's say, 70 books a month, and you've got 100 people working there, plus their salaries, their benefits, the rent, their 401k plans, all these expenses, they probably have overhead budgeted in. I mean, realistically, at least $20,000, if not $30,000 per title. You have to put a big number in there because they got expenses, all those other, that labor. So when Jim Lee says, listen, this stuff isn't even breaking even or it's losing money, he's talking about on a gross profit level, not on a net profit level. No way. No way. A massive number of these titles were losing money. Probably at least 50% of them. 50%. Because even their November solicitations for 2020 are cut back a bit, but they have 65 titles, 65 new titles. It's not cheap to produce that. It's not cheap at all to produce that. Now, their overhead is going to be less because they're cutting back on staff, but they're not going to consistently produce 65 new comic books a month if it's not profitable to do that. Now, they also mention that they're going to do this. They're going to focus on diversity. Okay. They want to make sure that they have diversity and inclusivity and make the comics in a way that they have authenticity to the storytelling that they're doing. Authenticity usually means that if somebody is of a certain race, a character is a certain race, you need to hire someone of that race to write that character, draw that character, whatever it is. Unfortunately, that has not always worked out well in terms of producing quality comics. So they have to accommodate with some of their line to do that, and they're going to need characters to specifically be designed to do that. So that'll be part of whatever's left over after this 20 or 25%, which I'm going to tell you is going to be 40 to 50%. It has to be. Has to be. Because they're not going to break. If he wouldn't be mentioning breaking even on publishing titles unless his boss told him, Jim, we need to break even on the titles that we're publishing. Okay? So they're going to have to cut back quite a bit to get to that point where they have sellers that can absorb the attributed overhead. Even with the reduced overhead, they're going to have a hard time making the numbers work. Another thing he's talking about doing is consolidating all their efforts and having editors involved in all these directives and organizing, broadly speaking, content that is for kids 6 to 11. And then 12 to 45, it's about consolidating format and oversight to a more concentrated editorial group. Well, a more concentrated editorial group, it means less titles. So they're going to have significantly less titles. they probably told him to say this because he knows it's not 20 to 25%. 50% is being generous. It could be 80%. Okay. Additionally, they're going to be bringing back the Milestone brand, which was the first universe of black superheroes done in the early 1990s by actually a friend of mine, Michael Davis, and some other, Denny Cowan, a bunch of other great, really talented guys. They were way ahead of their time. Their stuff was pretty good. It really was. And they had a good deal with DC Comics. But if they bring back and focus on those titles, that's even more of the other titles they have to cancel. So when he says 20 to 25%, think 40 to 50%, and then think of the remaining group of titles that are left, it's going to be much less. And then out of those less number of titles is where they have to source the new diversity books and where they have to source the Milestone books and the other 6 to 11 content, whatever that's going to be. So it's going to be a lot more significant than what he's saying right here. And he clearly knows. It's just, it is what it is, and it's going to take a little time to roll out and have people understand what the heck it is that they're doing. It's totally understandable that this would be happening. This is what happens when people buy the company and they're not just focused on putting out comics because that's the way it's always been done, and so on and so on. This is one other little point I wanted to mention. So Jim Lee also says here, it was about aligning the books to the franchise brand content we've developed. Now this makes sense. That Batman is not some murderous monster vampire killer in a comic if he's supposed to be on kids' toys and other merchandise and other mainstream films and TV and Lego branded merchandise and whatever. Like, Batman is supposed to always be Batman in all iterations of Batman, so it's got to be consistent with the brand's identity. That's going to be changing and limiting what they do with these characters, which obviously makes some sense. And secondly, he says, and making sure that every book we put out for a reason. I mean, obviously, if you're going to put a book out, it's always been for a reason. But for what kind of reason? Like he said earlier, they're talking about reaching global audiences and seeing comics as helping drive awareness and their international branding. So, it's going to be a case where the brands are going to be much more the way that like Disney used to handle Mickey Mouse, like very controlled, very consistent, very coherent. And when someone sees a comic, they'll be like, yeah, I definitely know that that's Batman. And if a mother buys that for a child, or if a friend buys it for his other friend, the Batman you're expecting to see is the Batman that you're going to get, not the complete off-the-wall versions of different characters, which will probably be actually good for DC Comics. They can write great stories and do great art within the constraints of respecting the canon and the brand. I mean, I don't know if they're going to have tight continuity or what exactly they're going to do, but it's going to be much more tightly controlled. And I would be expecting massive cancellations. This is a separate little article where DC is now announcing that they're canceling a lot of titles. Hellblazer, Hawkman, Teen Titans, Young Justice, Harley Quinn, Batgirl, Red Hood Outlaw, Batman and the Outsiders, Justice League Odyssey, Suicide Squad. That's a lot of titles. That's a big chunk of titles. So I would expect to see twice as many titles next month canceled. And then again, maybe another thinner month like this with another 10 titles or something like that. They're going to cut it back really, really aggressively. It's just the nature of things. All right. Well, put in the comments below what you think. Do you think it's going to be 20 to 25%? Or are you more like me and thinking like, nah, it's going to be 40 to 50%. And the leftover of the 50 to 60% that's left is going to have to be filled up with a bunch of Milestone titles, which is fine. But, it's not their mainstream DC, and they're going to have their other diversity titles and their other 6-year-old to 11-year-old content titles, and their brand loyal, coherent titles that basically are not as hardcore as some of the DC stuff they've been trying to do. Some of the more bland interpretations of the properties. See what you think. Let me know what you think in the comments. Subscribe to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. And if you want to support my work, again, collegeofthedead.com. Check that out. And sign up at epicmermaids.com so I can send you an email when The Mermaids comes out. I will see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.